Hello. Today we are going to do something that is going to be a mix of beauty and sadness, I guess, because we are going to be walking in beautiful fall colors while also telling the tale of how my father passed away from cancer. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be doing. And needless to say, before I start, this is going to be a sad tale of a real-life person slowly declining and then dying. So if that is triggering for you in any way, then you might not want to watch this. I know there's a whole meme about trigger warnings, but sometimes they are legitimately needed, and this is one of those cases. So I just want to give you that warning that we're going to be talking about this. So, yeah, just be ready for that. But before we get into that, just take a little bit of a look out the window at the kind of scenery that we're going to be seeing today. We haven't even left the car yet, and we have some trees. We're not quite at peak fall foliage, but we are very close, possibly a week away. Welcome to the fall in the Delaware Valley. And before I start on the story, I just want to make it clear that this is not me asking for money or asking for anything at all. I purely just want to tell this story just because I think it's healthy to tell, not just for me, but for just general education purposes, for people to know what this is like, because this is something that isn't unique to my dad, and it's happened to plenty of other people, and plenty of people in the future will go through this, sadly. So, I think there's value in that. I thought about recording this video at home, but why not come out here to where it is pretty and nice. It is a Friday in October. It's about 63 degrees, and it's just a very nice day. Very nice day to walk and talk. The other reason I wanted to come out here and do it is because I want to keep this story short and concise. I don't want to be getting lost in the weeds with various sidetracks and stuff. There's only so much memory on this phone, so I just want to be able to get it all done in one little take. And just in case anyone was wondering where we are indeed back at Washington's Crossing. And there's road work going on, so there's a lot of traffic. But that does not matter to us today. But I will allow for a quick aside as we cross the river over to New Jersey. Both because I just love this view, and I think that you should enjoy it too. And also, you remember in the other video, these pilings were underwater, and then they were very visible? Well, now you can see them very clearly because it has been dry lately. There's been minimal rain, unlike when we were here in August. All right, we've crossed the road and have entered the park. So without any further preamble, I can get into the story. The story begins in May of 22. It's actually the night of the Kentucky Derby. And late in the evening, probably 10 or 11 o'clock, and my father's about to go to bed. He's sitting at his chair in his office when he starts seeing flashes of light in his eye, and the next thing he knows, he's having a seizure. Now, I'm not there for this. I'm actually at my friend's house, but my mom is there. She sees the seizure happening, and she calls the ambulance, and he's taken away to the local hospital. Now, I come home about an hour later, and I notice that things are not right because, number one, the light in the garage is on. Number two, my mom's car is gone at 12:30 a.m., which is unusual for her. And so I knew that something was wrong. So, check the messages, find out that my dad has had a seizure. She's in the hospital. She comes home a little bit later, fills me in on what has happened. They don't know what it is or why it's happened, but he's probably going to be at the hospital for a few days. So my father is in the hospital for probably 4 or 5 days. For the first few days of that, he is in a, I don't know if you'd exactly call it a medically induced coma, but he's unconscious at the very least. And they release him. He comes home. My sister is actually down for a while to help out because of all this. So she's in the area. And from his point of view, he doesn't remember any of this. Like one moment he's in his chair, the next moment he's in the hospital and doesn't know why. So he had to get filled in by everyone else. So the doctors say they don't know what it is, and they think the most likely thing is tree branch, tripped on a tree branch. But the most likely thing is probably adult epilepsy, because apparently there's a small number of people who have late onset epilepsy that happens when they are seniors. I probably should have pointed out that my father was 71 at the start of the story. So they're like, yeah, that's probably what it is, but we should have him in for some scans just to make sure it's not something more serious. So they bring him in for scans, and they're like, well, there's something there. We don't know what it is, but we can tell there's something there, so we're going to book you for an appointment at a different hospital that has a higher resolution scanner, so we'll be able to find out what this mysterious thing is. So it's I believe it's June by now, and he goes to this other hospital, gets scanned, and they find out, like, yeah, this is definitely some sort of tumor. We don't know exactly what it is, but we need to remove it. So they schedule a surgery, and it's now late June, early July, something like this. And he goes in, has the surgery, has the tumor removed, at least as much of it as he possibly can. And they say, well, we're going to bring this down to the lab and analyze it, and we're going to find out what it is. So they do that, and they come back with the worst possible news that my dad could have gotten. It is stage 4 glioblastoma. Possibly the worst brain cancer that you can get. It is 100% fatal. Nobody has ever lived more than a couple of years with this, and most people die within just mere months. So pretty much from this point on, he knew that he was a dead man, basically, and there was not much to do about it. Although it turned out later that there was something that was possibly going to be of some hope, but we'll get to that when we get to that part of the story. So the thing about this cancer is, even if it's removed through surgery, it has a tendency to spread in like long tendrils downwards, and even if you remove like 99.99% of it, the cancer is so aggressive and so fast growing that it will always come back. Like, it is impossible to get 100% of it. So he has the surgery, and about a month after the first surgery, he has another one to get even more of it out. Now, his tumor began in, I believe it's called the occipital lobe, which is like back here, and he had it in the part of his brain that analyzed eyesight. So after that second surgery, he lost most of the peripheral vision in his right eye, so he couldn't really see things out of his right eye that weren't right in front of him. Of course, if that was the worst thing that happened to him, it would have been lucky. But, as I've already spoiled the ending to the story, it's no such luck. So by now he knows that he's basically a dead man and his time is limited, and I can only imagine what kind of things goes through a man's head when you know that you're about to die in a limited amount of time. Even if it's not right away, it's coming, and it's coming pretty soon. He never talked to me about what he was thinking, and he never really talked to anyone. He was the kind of guy who liked to keep all those kind of things to myself, so I won't speculate on what was going on in his mind. I'm just going to keep it strictly factual. So shortly after that, or around that time, possibly before this point in the story, he starts having his case managed by Penn Medicine, which is the hospital attached to the University of Pennsylvania, the Ivy League school. So it's actually one of the most prestigious hospitals in the whole country, and we happen to live within commuting distance of it. So that was very fortunate. My parents got very used to taking the Amtrak train down from Bucks County down to West Philadelphia, where the hospital was. There was a train station right at the hospital, so it was very convenient for them. And because they were seniors, they didn't have to pay, because seniors can ride for free on SEPTA. So it's now August, September of 22, and my dad is now going in for radiation appointments. Basically, he goes down and gets his brain zapped with radiation 5 days a week for several weeks. As you might imagine, it's a lot for him and for my mom, because it's almost like a full-time job of them doing this. Now, my parents are both retired, so they didn't have to worry about trying to work or pay bills during all this, but still, it was like a full-time job for them fighting this thing, this ultimately losing battle. But the other complication was, in the middle of September, I, who live at the same house, got COVID. Just one of those things. Like, I never had COVID all the way through the pandemic, but September of 22, finally got COVID. So if I had spread that to my dad, it would have, or even to my mom, it would have caused huge complications in his treatment. But I have to give all three of us credit. We were able to sort of divide ourselves off in a way where I actually never spread my COVID to my parents, and I got over it and they never got it. So that was something that we could all hang our hats on. So the radiation treatment was concluded, and so that part of it was done. And a scan in October, around this time, 2 years ago, showed that there wasn't regrowth. And at the time it felt like a reason to celebrate, because it seemed like the things were working. But, we all know, or we all knew, that this was a 100% fatal kind of a thing. So any kind of victory like that is only a temporary thing. And whether it comes back in a few days or a few months, it always comes back. So near the end of the year, they gave him this thing, which was basically some sort of electro zapping thing, where, how do I describe this? There was a little laptop with a cord connected to this like apparatus that he would wear on his head, and it would send signals into his brain for a certain number of hours of the day. And this thing was supposed to disrupt the growth of the cancer in some way. It was very strange. It was very cumbersome. He had to wear this stupid thing for like many hours every day, lugging around. Basically, imagine you have to lug around this bag with a laptop in it with this cord attached to a whole bunch of like wires on your head that makes you look like kind of like that Doc Brown introduction from 1955 in Back to the Future, where he has the thing, except it's not so bulky, it's closer to the head, but pretty awful. So he was doing that, and he was also taking chemotherapy drugs. So in the evening he would take his drugs, and he told me that these chemo pills were so potent that you had like a 5 or 10% chance of getting cancer just from the pills. So yeah, it's pretty serious stuff. Now, some parts of the timeline are kind of fuzzy, because I know that in the end he had ended up getting something like 6 different brain surgeries, which, I mean, by the time that a 72, 73-year-old man is getting 6 brain surgeries, it's time to throw in the towel. But what happened was, that winter, it was determined that because of the surgery, plus the radiation, and everything else that had been done to his brain, there was a lot of swelling and dead tissue, and they used the word radiation narcosis, which sounds pretty gnarly. So they had to do another surgery, not just for the tumor, but to get all that, dead tissue out of there and everything. So he was in pretty rough shape. And at that point, that's when they decided to stop with the electro zapping, stop with the chemotherapy, because that didn't seem to be doing much, and all it was doing was adding to this narcotic tissue, or necrotic tissue. I'm trying to use medical words that I don't really understand, so I hope that you are still kind of following me regardless. And let's take a momentary break just to enjoy the scenery of the woods for a few minutes. I think that was a worthwhile little break. We are talking about heavy things after all. So anyway, what happened was, there was a small, very small ray of hope in this time, which was that Penn Medicine was doing this first of its kind, never done before kind of study, where basically they were testing out a new method of fighting this cancer. And what this consisted of, now, I'm again talking about medical stuff that I only sort of understand, was in your immune system you have something called T cells, which fight infections, and they also fight cancers. So what they would do is extract these T cells from your body, train them on the cancer cells from the tumor, and once the T cells have adapted to fighting those cancer cells, they would inject them back into your brain so they would be able to fight the cells. Now, my dad was considered an ideal candidate for this, because apart from having a tumor, he was in otherwise excellent health. My dad always kept his health very well. He was a very fit man for a man in his lower 70s. He could run circles around a lot of guys 30 years younger than him. I should know. But, so he was indeed selected for this test. And there were a lot of preliminary things they needed to do. Number one, they needed to first do another surgery. We're up to at least number 3 or 4 now, which was to remove all of the tissue, or all of the cancer that they could find. And there was also another surgery to basically put a port in his head where they could inject the T cells into his brain. I mean, it sounds like we're getting into sci-fi horror territory. And, because I mean, drilling into your skull to put a port into your brain. I mean, this is why, I gave you a trigger warning at the beginning of this for a reason, right? So they did all that, and for the rest of his life, my dad had like a little lump right here where that port was. But that would be the site that they would inject the T cells. So at some point that spring, he had his first infusion. That's what they would call it. They did the first infusion, and at first it worked wonderfully. It just went in there and killed all the cancer. And they scanned his brain, and it's like, wow, it's all gone. And there was a moment there where there was that brief fleeting hope where it was like, wow, maybe he won't die of this. Maybe he will actually be literally the first person in history, in literal history, to survive stage 4 glioblastoma just because of this first of its kind clinical trial. But of course, it was not to be, because like I said, you can kill 99.99% of the cancer, but there's always going to be that little bit that survives. And I'm only speculating at this point, but I'm pretty sure that once you have that much cancer, there's always going to be some mutations in the cancer. And those, that the small amount of cells that have a certain mutation might be able to avoid the T cells and then be immune to it. And then it's a never-ending cycle of whack-a-mole, which can never be won, at least not yet. Hopefully, this was the hope that my parents had, even if this wouldn't result in saving his life. The scientific research gained, the knowledge gained from my dad taking part in this experiment would help future people who had this. So that was the big hope. And maybe it still will. I don't know. But in life, my dad was a scientist. That was his career. He was a chemist in particular. But it's kind of heartwarming to know that even when he was dying, when he was a dying man with no chance in the world of surviving, he was still doing science. Oh, just a little tree branch to walk over. Just like that. Well, believe it or not, everything that I've told you up to this point has been the easy part of the story. This has all been the nicer and fluffier stuff compared to what comes next. So this is your warning that things are about to get darker. Because up until then, it's like he knew he was going to die. He knew that there were going to be effects from this tumor, and it was going to be gruesome. But for the first year, from May to May of 23, it was all theoretical. It was all like, this will happen. We expect it to happen, but we don't know what it's going to be like. But then things started to change. My dad started to neurologically change and degenerate. At first it was pretty subtle, like he would get certain words wrong or not remember what to say. Like one time he was talking about somebody and was trying to use the word inflammation, but it came out inflation, and he just couldn't get that right. And soon he began forgetting people's names. He would just sort of like fixate on one name, and that would be the name for everyone. And he would start getting confused. It was very subtle at first, but by about July of last year, it was very obvious. Like one day he was trying to figure out how to turn on the water in the sink, and he was opening up the cabinets looking for how to turn on the water. And another time we came into the kitchen and there was just sugar everywhere. And we don't know what he was trying to do, and we don't think that he knew what he was trying to do. But there was just sugar all over the counter and the floor. And sometimes he would start to freak out and get real nervous and like run around going shit, 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 like something was wrong. But we had no idea what he was worried about. And he was clearly losing touch in some way with reality. And sometimes he would get really upset and really emotional and frustrated. And it almost felt like he was growing up in reverse, because he started to have little tantrums. He'd bang his fist on the table and be like, God damn it, God damn it. And the way he said it was like, not just like the way I said it. Like, imagine this very, almost, this vocal tone of pure existential dread and fear and just horror as he would just bang his fist and say, God damn it. And keep in mind, my dad was a man who, throughout his life, was always a very dignified, kind of like a quiet guy. Didn't fuss, especially didn't like to make a fuss about himself. And so all this was very out of character. And then the physical problems began, and they came on really fast. In September of last year, he was still mostly able to walk around fine. By October, he had to basically, he was stooped over and feeling his way around with his hands as he navigated the house. And we thought that it was because his vision was degenerating because of the tumor. But it was more than his vision. It was his, his sense of how to control his muscles. And then November came. And November started one of the worst, the absolute worst stretch of all of this. It got to the point where he couldn't walk without a cane, and within a few weeks progressed to the point where he couldn't walk without a walker. Now, he had been living, upstairs in the bedroom with my mother that they've always had, but at this point, going up the stairs just became too complicated for him. So they got him a hospital bed, and they put the hospital bed in the living room of the house, which is actually directly above where I sit. If you've ever seen my other videos where I'm in the basement, it was pretty much exactly directly over where I was. And at night, this was happening before, but now I noticed it even more. But at night, he would wake up and just start completely freaking out about things, just imagining things. No idea what was going on in his head during any of that time, but he'd make really disturbing, freaking out noises. And I'd be sitting there on my computer doing whatever, and 8 feet directly above me, my dad would be making these really awful noises. And my mom would be trying to understand what was happening and try to calm him down. At this point, he was too weak to really hurt himself or anyone, but he would just, also at this point, he was wearing Depends because he couldn't regulate his, bathroom needs, and sometimes he would just make a big mess like that, and my mom would have to clean it up, and very often I'd have to help. So it got to be very, very bad. And it was around this time that the falls started happening. And the falls are the absolute worst thing, because when my dad would fall, he would end up crumpled on the ground in usually a very unnatural looking position. And when most people fall, like if you have an elderly family member who falls, the reason they can't get up has more to do with their strength. But in the case of my dad, it was due to the fact that he simply could no longer properly use his muscles to pull himself up. It wasn't that he didn't have those muscles anymore, because he still did, but he just couldn't operate them. It was almost like a little baby, except it was a very, very large baby that you can't just pick up. At this time, he was still able to walk with a walker, but you could tell that those times were clearly coming to an end, because he was having a real hard time coordinating himself, and just getting up and down out of his chair was very difficult. You know, my mom tried to keep things as normal as possible for the longest amount of time. Like, they would still watch the shows that they would always watch, and she would try to treat things like they were just any other day for as long as she could. And I can't really blame her for that, even if it wasn't realistic, because, you know, that's a pretty intense pill to swallow, watching all this happen. So Christmas came. He's barely able to walk, but at least he was able to see some family came, and they saw him for what we all knew was going to be the last time. And this whole time I was like, well, he's done. You know, how much worse can it get? And turned out it could get quite a bit worse before he went. So the new year started. It was January, and he still had a couple seizures during this time. He was on anti-seizure medication, but they had to lower the dosage because they were contributing to him like having his freakouts at night. So they lowered the dosage, but that resulted in him having more seizures, and it was just, you know, very many, like several more times he was in the hospital for a day or two before being released. And in January, he walked for his final time. He could no longer do it, and it was during one of these the last time he was ever out of the house. He went to the hospital, and when he was coming back, he was walking across the room and he just fell and just couldn't get back up for a very long time. So, and he only could get up with great difficulty and great help from the rest of us. So that was the last time he walked, and from then on, the only way he was going around was in a wheelchair. And for the moment, he could still stand, pivot, and go down into his wheelchair, but that was a great difficulty. So by the end of January, he was spending pretty much all his time in bed. And usually there was a little bit of a pattern that my mom established, that for 3 times a day she would try to get him up and out of bed into the wheelchair and wheel him over to the kitchen table or to the living room to watch TV or whatever. And it used to be that he could do that pretty well, but by the time that February rolled around, he was to the point where just sitting up and turning 90 degrees, standing and then sitting in the wheelchair was a task that was just like conceptually beyond his abilities. Like, some days he could do it, some days he couldn't. And sometimes he would just like freak out. He would hold on to the metal bars of the, like his hospital bed had like bars at the front, and he would like hold on to those bars and freak out like he was about to fall off a cliff or something. And sometimes we were able to get him to cooperate and get in the chair, and then other times we weren't. And all the while, his strength continued to disintegrate. His legs pretty much degenerated into just like bone. It looked like a skeleton. And pretty much his entire body was starting to become pretty skeletal, except for his belly, because somehow throughout all this he retained his appetite. So he was still eating a bit, but without being able to exercise or, use the rest of his body. He was just growing a gut. So you basically had someone who was approaching skeleton status, but still had a gut. And of course, that extra weight made it very difficult for times where he would fall or something like that. Because even in these times, he was able to still fall somehow. Like one time he rolled off his bed, managed to get tangled up in the covers and be hanging there on the side, and was calling out for help. Fortunately, my mom had a baby monitor, so she would be able to hear him. And I was also there. I was downstairs, and I heard him too. But by the middle of March, he was no longer able to get out of bed at all. It was just beyond him. So he was just literally laying there in the one spot and could not move. And this whole time, I mentioned before, his ability to communicate had worsened. Well before this, he pretty much lost the ability to be coherent at all. Like, he would still say words, but the words wouldn't be connected to anything that we could figure out. So if he needed something, or if he wanted something, we didn't know. There was no way to know, because he couldn't communicate it to us. So unless we were able to figure out what was bothering him, we just couldn't know. So it did result in a lot of suffering, just because he was not able to communicate in any way, not even by like pointing to things or making gestures. He just lost the ability to communicate in just about any way. So he'd be lying there in his bed, and I probably should point out at this point that it was in January, around the time that he walked for his last time, that he formally went on to hospice. And that was something that my mother had resisted for quite a while, but finally she conceded that there was nothing else to do, and just putting him through all these trials and everything else was just needless suffering. So January was the time where he transitioned to hospice. So he just stayed from mid-March on. He was just in his hospice bed. My mother was pretty much by his side 24/7. When she was asleep, she would have the little baby monitor on. She still had to go take care of my grandparents. That's something I didn't mention through all of this. Her own parents are still alive. They're very elderly and they need help themselves. So my mother would have to go over there to their place once a week and leave me in charge of watching over my dad for 2 to 3 hours a week. And I can tell you, like, those were some stressful hours. And just the fact that I only had to do it for 2 or 3 hours, but my mom was doing it for 24/7. I mean, that is some hardcore trauma right there. I mean, yeah, I was there and I can only barely imagine it. But in mid-April, 6 months ago from this current moment, I was downstairs and I heard this weird sound coming from upstairs it was a sound of him suffering in some way, but it sounded different than the usual sounds he was making at that point. So I go upstairs to check on him, and I've seen that he's thrown up. And throughout this entire process, he's never thrown up, but he just threw up everything that he had in him. So I was talking to him, woke my mom up. We were both attending to him, cleaning him up and everything. And this was what ended up being the final turning point. Because after this, he couldn't eat anything. His body would just throw up anything that was put in it. And he was pretty much moaning in pain just constantly. And that was a signal that that we realized that the end was finally here. It was days away, and so that's when they started putting my dad on his, I don't remember the exact term, but I think it's like the comfort kit or something that you really only use at the very, very end of life. So they brought that out. They started using whatever drugs or whatever was in there. They put him on oxygen, and he was just pretty much comatose. Couldn't eat anything, was just in a stupor. And that lasted about 4 days. So I had wanted to be by his side when he died, but as it turned out, he passed when I was asleep. The night before, I had picked up my aunt, my father's youngest sister, from the Philly airport at midnight, which is, a hell of a annoying drive to have to do, but I was happy to do it, of course. So my two aunts could come and be with my dad at the end. So I was asleep, and I'm not shy to admit that I had been hitting the whiskey a little hard in those days before, so I, got somewhat drunk after I got home from bringing my aunts home, and I was sleeping, and I woke up at about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning to use the bathroom, and I heard very distinctive sounds coming from downstairs that let me know without a shadow of a doubt that my father has died. So, use the bathroom, pull on some sweatpants or whatever, and go down there. And he had just passed. And I could tell that it had just happened because he was laying there, and I put my hand on his hand, and it was still warm. So it had just been minutes before. He did not die alone, though, because my mother was there by his side. She had been making breakfast, listening to him on the baby monitor, and she heard these gaps in breathing, and rushed over to be by him. Now, one thing I learned leading up in the process is that in the last few hours of life, the person will start to have longer and longer gaps between breathing. And that was what happened. For whatever reason, I didn't pick up on those hints on the final day, even though I had watched videos and learned about it, but I didn't put it together. But yeah, I put my hand on his hand. It was still warm. And I said my final goodbyes. And it was my mom, my sister, and I, and my two aunts all in the house. And it was a Sunday morning. It was April 21st. And then someone, my mom or sister, called the people. They came over. They pronounced his death. And then a couple hours after that, they come with the body bag, and they take him away. Take him to the funeral home. A day later, they come and they take away all the hospice stuff. And then it's time to prepare for the funeral and all that kind of stuff. So that became a pretty surreal time, those 2 weeks between the death and the funeral, because it was a time of a lot of activity, and it was very activating, I should say. I don't know what the right word is. I wouldn't say exciting, because that's not the right word, but there was certainly a lot going on, and it it made me feel more alert, because I had to make many trips to the airport, to the train station to pick up this family member or that family member. Sometimes, flights would be delayed until like 1 a.m., so I'd be the one, because I never minded being awake at weird times, so I'd be the one going down to the airport in the middle of the night and picking people up, and my mom and sister were the ones doing all the preparations for the funeral. And the funeral ended up happening just a couple days after what would have been his 73rd birthday. So the funeral happened, a whole bunch of people came in, including relatives, former friends. There were a lot of little speeches. Now, my dad always hated to have the center of attention focused on him, and he would have been utterly embarrassed that everyone was paying him this much attention, but we all gave little speeches. I gave a speech myself. Most people, including my mom and sister, wrote their speeches down word for word, but I don't really work that way. I went over to the park, not this park, but some other park, and I just walked around and I jotted down basically an outline, like key points that I wanted to hit in my speech, and just fill in the details as I go. So that's what I did. I made the speech. Everyone else made their little speeches, and then that was that. I helped pick out the playlist that would play at the, the funeral home. My mother and sister, and I think a few of my aunts, created these posters, these like 8 sort of poster things that had just like pictures of my dad throughout various parts of his life, showing, his childhood, his working years, his family life, and his hobbies and interests and things, and I thought those were very well done. So all that happened, and there was a little get-together at the local senior center that happened after the funeral. So we all went over there and had like little sandwiches and stuff and chatted. And I had about 5 different family members invite me to come visit them. I've only been on one of these trips so far. I intend to go on all of them. I have to go to Texas still. I have to go to Massachusetts. And I have to go to Illinois. These are 3 trips that I want to make within the next 2 years. The one trip I did go on is I did go to Tennessee to visit my cousin who lives in the Knoxville area. And that was actually a very nice trip. That took place late May, early June. But anyway, we've reached the end of the story. And I'm not really sure what kind of summary I have or any kind of words I want to say just to wrap it all up. That is what stage 4 glioblastoma looks like, and that's what it looks like to die of that. He lasted for almost 2 years from the first signs of something being wrong to his death. It was just a few weeks shy of 2 years. A man in his early 70s who was very healthy and had access to some really great health care and a experimental trial, which I think probably at the very least prolonged his life by a good 6 months, if not a little bit more. So all that's done, and the big question now is, how do the rest of us who are still here move on with our lives, and how are we all figuring out how to do that? And that is a topic for another time, because I don't want this video to be about myself. I'm telling the story of my dad. So yeah, we're pretty much at the end. Well, I'm impressed with myself. I actually managed to get through the entire story before the phone memory ran out, which is what I was fearing this entire time. So, I just want to say thank you for listening to my story. And once again, I'm not looking for any kind of money or anything like that. That's not the reason that I've done this. I just wanted to tell this story, and now I have. There's probably a bunch of little things, little details that I missed in there, and if anyone has any questions or anything, I'm sure I will be in the comments willing to answer whatever I can. But like I said, I'm not a medical professional at all, and I only know so much. But I want to thank you all for watching this, and I can at least promise you there won't be any videos this dark on the horizon. Anything else I do is going to be a little bit more cheerful than this. So, goodbye everybody, and I'll see you all later. This is why fall can be kind of weird around here. You look in this direction, it looks like fall's barely begun. If you look in that direction, it looks like fall's almost over. That's what it's like.